Dr. Thomas Sowell is an economist, a social theorist, a political philosopher, and an author. He's also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University. Although I don't agree with every thought, idea, or argument he has, this is true of almost everyone I show or highlight in my videos. Although most of the videos I show have a conservative slant, they're meant to highlight issues with certain liberal agendas and provide challenges to what the more radical left takes for granted. An article written by Dr. Sowell begins with, Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said there were phrases that serve as an excuse for not thinking. One of these phrases that substitute for thought today is one that depicts the current problems of blacks in America as a legacy of slavery. New York Times writer Nicholas Kristof asserts that there is overwhelming evidence that centuries of racial subjugation still shape inequality in the 21st century, and he mentions the lingering effects of slavery. Now, Dr. Sowell goes on to discredit this overwhelming evidence, then continues, if we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. In other words, we could compare hard evidence on the legacy of slavery with hard evidence on the legacy of liberals.
Well, in 1960, which would be almost 100 years after the end of slavery, 22% of black kids grew up in homes with only one parent.
Just 22%?
Yes.
4 out of 5 were in homes with both parents?
Yes. 30 years later, after the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled. And so I said, well, let us compare, if we can speculate on how much that 22% was due to the legacy of slavery. But we know that that tripling was not due to the legacy of slavery. It was due to the legacy of a whole different set of policies. And you can look at it so many other ways. Education. Stuyvesant High School in New York, as you know, you get into only by passing a very tough exam. In 2012, the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School was less than 1/10 of the percentage of black students who had gotten into Stuyvesant High School 33 years earlier.
I didn't know that.
There's Dunbar High School in Washington, which was an elite black high school for a very long time. In 1993, the number of kids out of Dunbar High School who went on to college was less than it was 60 years earlier, which would have been in the depth of the Great Depression. And so you can run through a whole bunch of other things like that. Look at the housing projects. The housing projects in the first half of the 20th century, during that first 100 years after slavery, did not have the high crime rates, the murder rates, the graffiti, all the rest of it we associate. None of that was there. People, like the New York Times, Kristof should read his own old papers, pointed out that on Saturday mornings it was common in the housing project of this earlier era for parents to leave their doors unlocked because some of the parents could afford television, some couldn't. So the ones who had television would leave their doors unlocked, and the kids from the other families could come down there and watch television with them. Well, now the latest figures show that most people below the poverty line have 2 television sets and cable, but they wouldn't dare leave their doors unlocked in a public housing project.
I'm quoting that column again. Liberals have wreaked more havoc on blacks than the supposed legacy of slavery they talk about.
Yes.
You don't mean that hyperbolically.
No, I do not.
You mean it.
Yeah, and another thing, crime and violence. Now we take it for granted that there's tremendous levels of crime and violence in the black community. That was not always the case. In the 20s, it was very common for white celebrities, including George Gershwin and William Faulkner, to go up to Harlem not only for entertainment places, but to go into private homes of people they knew. And Gershwin played Rhapsody in Blue in this home where Walter White lived. Milton Friedman, when he was a graduate student at Columbia, he and the lady he later married would go dancing at the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. And he said we had no fear of being mugged or accosted on the street or anything like that.
I've heard you say, Tom, when you were a boy growing up in Harlem yourself, Your own neighborhood felt totally safe to you.
Not totally safe. I wouldn't exaggerate, but there's nothing resembling today. I mean, I did sleep on hot nights. I would sleep out on the fire escape. When I tell people in Harlem that today, they think I'm from another galaxy, you know. But that people slept on the fire escapes in New York and in the public parks in the 30s, all over the city.
Now, in the full interview, Dr. Sowell talks about the fight for civil rights, Martin Luther King, and how there's a distinction between that cause and the ability to look at the Great Society and examine the damage caused by the imposition of the welfare state. He believes the system in place right now has rewards for staying on welfare, has punishments imposed for trying to work and get off of welfare. The result are the kinds of statistics he originally mentioned. If this system is said to help those in need, then how does one account for the incredible increase in single-parent homes, the reduction of student enrollments in those elite high schools, and the vast increase in the crime rates within African American communities? If the argument is that the welfare system is not connected to those things, it is at least certainly obvious that the system does not help them. At what point do you consider a system a failure? Charles A. Murray is a controversial libertarian conservative who is a critic of the welfare state. A universal basic income has been discussed for the past few years, and here is his plan in very general and broad terms.
The basics are this. At the age of 21, every American who holds a passport, which is issued at birth and has the same function as an ordinary passport, but also establishes your eligibility as an American citizen for the Universal Basic Income, UBI, starts to receive a monthly deposit electronically to a known bank account of $13,000 divided by 12. $13,000 is the total basic income, of which $3,000 must be devoted to health care, which I'm going to push aside because it's a complicated additional topic. So you have $10,000 of disposable income that you're getting in monthly allotments. Well, I think that there are all sorts of ways to do that which would cause catastrophe. I think if we simply add that onto the current benefit system, it's not affordable and it also is a catastrophe. But what if it replaces everything else? There's no more Medicare, no more health insurance, Social Security. There's no more welfare. There's no more corporate welfare. There's no more agricultural subsidies. I can go through the whole list of transfers. There's none of that stuff, and there's also none of the bureaucracies that administer it. You have $10,000, and you say, well, you can't live on $10,000. Well, if you really want to live all by yourself, no, you'll live a pretty grubby existence on $10,000. You get a minimum wage job, just a minimum wage job, and you work 2,000 hours a year at, let's say, $750. That's $15,000 plus 10. That's $25,000. Yeah, that's way above the poverty line. Well, suppose for some reason you can't work, or suppose you don't want to work. You can still have a decent existence if you're cooperative. If you're cooperative enough to convince a friend, a girlfriend or boyfriend, a relative or something else to pool your resources, if you just do it with 2 people, you got 20. With no working whatsoever, you got 30 if you got 3 people. You add a little bit of income and you're in the middle class. That $10,000 given to everyone has a huge effect on their ability to live a decent existence by doing reasonable things. But it also has, I think, a couple of other huge advantages, again, because of some features of my specific plan, which I'm quite proud of. One is right now we claw back benefits at a very low rate, so that if you're on food stamps and Medicare, and you take a job, you very soon face a very punitive loss of benefits. I say, look, you keep your entire $10,000. We don't claw back a cent of it until you have $30,000 in earned income. Once you have $31,000 in earned income, you'll pay $50 or some very minor clawback, and that'll increase as your income rises. But I'm really saying to somebody who's gotten up to $30,000 of earned income, okay, you now got a net of 40. You really want to quit work and go back to 10? Yeah. I'm luring them in to work until they can't quit. And the other thing that I've really like about it is that it reverses some really terrible incentives. For example, the people who do not work because they're afraid of losing their benefit, that all disappears. They go to work, they're pure profit for them to go to work, whereas now it can be very punitive. The second thing is, consider the classic case of the young woman who has a baby and no husband. Well, it is a statement of fact that under the current system that generates an income stream she would not have otherwise had. I'm not saying she has the baby to get the income stream. I'm saying it does generate an income stream. Under the plan I'm proposing, she has an income stream. The baby is going to be a major drain on that income stream. Now that can also be good. All of us who have children have a major drain on our income streams as a result that we're delighted to have. But it does get the incentives right. I really want a baby. I know I'm going to be paying for diapers and baby food and all that, and I still want the baby. Okay. But if you got the income stream and you say, gee, do I really want to spend it on those kinds of things? Or do I want to spend it on some more education or better clothes or something? That gets those incentives right.
Now, there are many that oppose the universal basic income concept, arguing that it would be more costly than the welfare system currently in place. This is completely dependent upon how it's implemented, the payment amounts, the income cutoffs, the clawback rates, etc. What cannot be argued, however, is that there is an enormous administrative and bureaucratic cost associated with the welfare system as it currently exists. For every dollar that goes to an individual in need, there are administrative costs that are associated with it. Now, trying to find those costs becomes a huge rabbit hole filled with opinions and agendas. But two things seem pretty clear. The incentives are wrong within the current system, and there is a large bureaucracy in place, with thousands of people whose livelihood depends on keeping the status quo. Finland is testing a small version of basic income right now. Maybe the results they get will be the first indicator of the viability of such a program. Remember, like and subscribe, but most importantly, leave comments and engage with others. Open discussion is always needed. If you have nothing valid to say,
ZeroFox given.